Hello and welcome to this special edition of ENCORE from the Louis Vuitton Foundation for Contemporary Art in Paris. We're here to meet one of the most celebrated artists working today and perhaps one of the most enigmatic, Olafur Eliasson. From creating an entire weather system in the turbine hall of London's Tate Modern to planting a kaleidoscopic viewing machine in the Brazilian countryside, this Danish-Icelandic artist's body of work is diverse and always thought-provoking. He's the first artist to be invited to show his own work alongside the permanent collection here at the Foundation. Let's go and meet him. Olafur Eliasson, thank you so much for speaking to France 24. I'd like to start by asking about the name of this show, Contact. In a world where we're increasingly virtually and remotely in contact, what is your understanding of this word?
Well, my view of the world is not necessarily that we are in contact. I mean, we see a lot of things happening everywhere in the world every day, and we feel a sense of, we recognize them, but we also feel a sense of despair. We're disconnected. We don't know what to do about it, how to react upon ISIS, how to react upon the climate, and so on. So the issue of contact is very much for me about how do we touch the world so it actually makes an impact, so it matters. And this is a question that I'm very curious about, because we tend to want to address it as something that we do by touching something outside of ourselves. But this exhibition is, one could argue, a question with regards to, is touching something maybe also a question about how does one touch the inside of oneself?
Now, this exhibition includes a lot of pieces that are more experiences than actual objects, and when a person enters into them or interacts with them, they really come to life. But there are no human beings in your work normally. Why is that?
I would often consider the spectator or the visitor in my exhibition as a part of the exhibition, a co-producer. So I, being the artist, I make half the work, but you coming and visiting, seeing things and experiencing things, you become a co-producer. You finish the narrative that I started. And I'm very interested about this idea of, I'm active doing what I'm doing, but you're also acting, you're producing the show with me. You're not here to consume. You're here to take a stand and produce. This idea is about confidence. I trust you to be able to finish my story. I make my story open-ended so that you can make of it what you think is relevant for you. And in this case, I would talk about the ability for an exhibition to reflect what your need is. And in that sense, I think you see something, you wonder what it is, you start to kind of negotiate, you go through a certain process and say, oh, this is what it's about, this is what I think it's about, this is me. I am in the show is seeing me, I'm the sculptor, you could say. And why this is interesting, because it's about, how do you see the world? What use is looking at the world to you? Well, maybe you should think of the world as being something that you also produce by engaging in it. So you're perfectly right addressing, well, this is an emotional show. There's no people, there's no words, nobody tells you what to do. You kind of have to figure out your journey here yourself.
Now, the aesthetic of this show, Contact, and the names of some of the pieces, like the Big Bang Fountain, Parallax Planet, they really conjure up ideas of the universe, the solar system, this kind of thing. Is Contact a way of trying to get in touch with other galaxies, perhaps other life forms?
Well, actually not really, to be honest. But I'm so excited about this. No, let's say there is a narrative here which comes from cosmology, right? The questions of outer space and so on and so forth. This grid in which we're standing, it could be kind of a map of stars or something like this, but it could also be a subconscious map. So I think of the universe as something which is like almost a metaphor for a subconscious map, or something that we carry around us inside of ourselves. So this is called a net for unthought thoughts. It's the things that we feel, but we haven't sorted out what we can say about them yet, right? So we could say it's like a felt meaning. So the first thing you do when you come to this show is like you say, oh, what is that? Is that a stone, or what is that? Oh, it's a meteorite. And it's called touch. I named it touch. And then I say, oh, touch, I can touch it. And this is for many people, it was for me for sure, the first time that you touch something which is not from this planet. was like totally mind-boggling. You say, I am touching the untouchable.
Well, much of your work, this show and past work, involves optical illusions and tricks of perception. You're something of a visual magician. Do you think that, you know, this confusion of the spectator, of the viewer, about what is real and what is unreal, is it what we touch, what we see, is that real, or is it a construct? Is it in our head?
Well, I like the way you use the word real, because the way I see it, reality is relative. I mean, who knows what real is, right? Because real is really, I think, something that our senses tells us about our surroundings. But it turns out that our senses are cultural constructs too. Right? If we want to, we can modify our senses. And this is very often what my works do. They tell us, well, look at this not with your eyes, but look at it with your hands. Look at it with your feet. How is your sense of balance? Do you feel discomfortable or comfortable? And this, I think, draws to the fact, well, the world is really relative to your engagement, which is what I've been talking about also. And I like this idea of, well, it might come across as an optical illusion, but if you have a closer look, you go like, well, oh, it's just a lamp, and you know, it's just a stick, and then there's a shadow. It's nothing more to it than that. I could have done it at home. Reality is not something static; it's moving. Just like we want our democracies to be sort of evolving and changing and sort of updating to this sort of new model in order to kind of fit the society that we live in.
The spaces that you create often involve natural elements. You've created a riverbed in a museum, for example. How would you describe, or how do you feel about the relationship between art and nature?
Well, for me, nature is a great resource. It's something that's just so amazing, and it's very interesting because, you know, I am the generation when nature sort of became culture. Well, I was the generation which had to understand, well, nature or natural resources are really cultural resources. Maybe there are no nature anymore. Maybe it's all culture by now, right? We call it the Anthropocene, right? The man-made planet. It's a very interesting question when addressing the question of the climate. Is the climate something which is within our cultural horizon, or is the climate something that is out there, which we could call nature? And of course, for my generation, it's the first generation where it suddenly is on the inside.
You're known as an artist, but there's often a scientific element in your pieces, a kind of experimental theme. How do you reconcile those two worlds, art and science, in your day-to-day work?
Well, I think science is out there asking a lot of great questions, and very often very interested in how do they ask questions? What is the methodology? I'm not so, well, the truth is I don't always understand the answers because this is, you know, science. But I'm very interested in how does science work? How does social science, you know, political science, what is policy making today, right? That's so interesting. But also natural science, cosmology, astrophysics, and so on. Very often the idea of creativity can become a little, let's say, I wouldn't say elitist, but it can be very self-obsessive, sort of the art world and all of that. So science is a nice way to kind of do a little reality check. So for me, it's a way to sort of maintain a kind of critical inquiry control with what I'm doing also.
Now, one of the pieces in this show, Inside the Horizon, is a piece that kind of straddles the inside and the outside of the building. It was commissioned specially for this building, and it's very closely linked to the architecture. How difficult or problematic is it for an artist to have a commission like that, a brief? And how prescriptive was the brief?
Well, normally a brief for commission work is not very prescriptive, because obviously it wouldn't really work if a client come and said, oh, you know, it has to, you know, if I said to the client, oh, I made it a certain color to match your sofa, the client would say, well, then it's not art, is it? I was very lucky to be asked to do a commission here, and it's a very exciting situation altogether for me. But the thing is, I also wanted to challenge them, of course. I wanted to tell the architect, Frank Gehry, listen, we need to kind of put some muscle in there. We need to do something that really makes a difference to the space. Otherwise, what's the point otherwise? And they were very open to that. And I was lucky that they liked the word and said, well, this is exciting, we should do it, let's go ahead with it, and so on. It's a process where I, as an artist, has to stand up for the creativity and the artistic values that I have. And then the rest of the team, they can do what they need to do. And on a good day, it comes through like what happened outside.
Okay. Well, the last time you were exhibited in Paris was some 12 years ago in the Museum of Modern Art, and that's a public institution. It's free to go in. It's been a long time since you were there. How different is it creating an exhibition for a private institution? Is it different?
Oh, it certainly is different to work with the public sector and the private sector. There's often the illusion to think that the public sector is kind of a free space and the private sector is like not free. That's a mistake, because the public sector, of course, has a lot of political agendas, intentionalities, and so on and so forth. It's a different way of navigating. Sadly, we are seeing a situation where both the trust in culture and the funding in culture in the public sector is going down. And unfortunately, the public sector is using the increased interest from the private sector as a justification for cutbacks in the public sector, which is very sad and very naive by the public sector as well. So I would, of course, encourage the public sector to show the trust to the civic society to have culture at its heart, which is an uphill battle for the time being, unfortunately, especially as politics is becoming increasingly populistic or nationalistic. So luckily, there's some private people or some private sector protagonist who's taking upon a more riskful position, saying, let's build a museum, let's do an institute, let's make programs for art and culture, but it's not really gonna be able to do the same as a public sector. It's something else. It's also amazing, it's very important, but the public sector should maintain a very robust relationship to culture.
Absolutely. Well, my last question is a question and a bit of a challenge, if you like. My favourite and most interesting element I find in your work is your use of light. The way a painter might use paint, for example, you often use light. But if I were blind, how would you express or explain what light is to me? How would you manage to communicate that in a non-visual way?
Well, I just love light, so I'm not sure exactly. The thing is also, I keep using light in different ways. So once I think I have a model for how I can do things, I always change it anyway, right away. Of course, we have a history with light where there is both the pragmatic, to be able to read and educate yourself because of light and energy on one side, but on the other side, light is also being, about spirituality. It's about believing in something. It's about having confidence in there is a tomorrow. So light has this very beautiful potential that one needs to unlock sometimes.
Olafur Eliasson, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.